Welcome into Kickin It. I am Jeff Woody, and we're here with Grant Mahoney. This is Kickin It, like I said, on the Cyclone Fanatic Podcast Network. We're here in the Wild Rose Casino and Resort Studios, and Kickin It is brought to you by Kelvin Manufacturing. We mentioned it during harvest season. It is post-harvest season, but if you need... Quit sniffing the microphone, Grant. It's like doing a podcast with a toddler. Anyway...
Just checking my, how far away I am from it.
Just making sure that right during the Kelderman read, just make sure the sponsors are super happy.
If my nose is on it, then my lips aren't on it. So
that's, I guess that's true. Anyway, so thanks Kelderman Manufacturing, excuse me, for sponsoring this. Also, the Cyclone Fanatic Podcast Network is fueled by Cody Road. I actually saw Ryan Burchett, the Cody Road guy, as I was walking in. His tailgate spot was like 40 feet from where my in-laws tailgate spot was, and he was trying to flag down one of his buddies, literally like jumping up and down, like waving his hands, and
he was waving the wheat.
Nope.
Good.
Don't.
Good.
Don't.
I would have had to
thresh that.
Chop his wheat. Yeah. Chop his wheat.
But it was like jumping up and down, and I was like, "Is that?" Aaron was like, "Do you know them? Because is he trying to flag you down?" I was like, "I don't know who that is," and she was like, "No, you absolutely don't know who that is." I was like, "Oh, that's Ryan. Hey, Ryan." So we went and say hi to him. So anyway, thanks to Ryan and Cody Road for sponsoring this. Anyway, Iowa State falls to Kansas 28-21, excuse me, on Saturday in what was an extremely weird game. And I think the weirdness of it was mostly in officiating and special teams, and then the intersection of those two things. So do you want to start with officiating or special teams? And then we can mix them.
I want to first start off by saying I'm not sure I should be allowed in Jack Trice Stadium anymore. The last 3 games I've been to, Iowa State has lost.
I've been Kansas, Iowa,
and Texas.
Texas.
I didn't go to a game last year. The year before, I went to Texas and Iowa, lost them both.
Man, don't do that.
So I was going to get season tickets. I was not at any games last year. You would have thought I was at all of them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe you're not the jinx because last year wasn't good.
But I wear the wrong underwear in all of the home games last year.
Is it the ones that you washed or the ones that you haven't washed yet?
The ones that I washed, but they've got the Christmas bells on them, so you can hear them.
Oh, okay.
when I'm walking,
Walking up and down the stairs and just keeps turning over their head.
Yeah.
It's like,
is that the dog or Grant?
Nope, that's Grant. It's just
got those damn boxes on again. Wash them. Let's dive into officiating, man.
Officiating. Okay.
No, time out, actually. Time out. Let's not dive into any of it. You talk about tailgating. I want to talk about tailgating. I stopped at Bloom's.
Wait. Grant Gripes?
Grant Gripes? This is Grant Gripes?
No, Grant's
positives?
Grant's opposite of Gripes.
Grant's gratitude.
Grant's
There
gratitude. There you go.
Grant's greats.
Grant's greats.
Grant's greats.
Grant's greats. Grant's greats. So, I went to Bloom's tailgate this weekend. Went to a few different tailgates, saw some fans.
And true or false, it's the first time you ever met Brent Bloom in person.
That's true. He said false. It's definitely true. I said, yeah, you are a short king, Blake Groupie. And he said, I am Blake Groupie. I said, you're having a hell of a year. Then he gave me an Ames Lager. Delicious. But as I was bopping around the tailgate lot, saw some fans, and people do listen to the show. They were complimenting me on how well we do, and they enjoy the show.
Complimenting you, not me, not Aiden, not us. Complimenting
No, they said they like the show.
People only say stuff to me when I screw up, so it's just kind of part of it, I guess.
mean, even Bloom was like, you guys are doing a great job. My guys, Brad and Bill, they were at Bloom's tailgate. They're saying how we do a great job, and so shout out Brad and Bill.
Yeah, I actually do get a lot of shout outs like, you and Mahoney show, that's really fun. So I think that's kind of the goal. So
all right.
Hopefully it's fun for
Neato,
people. The point of this is not to be serious if you can't quite pick up on the tone that Grant was sniffing the microphone and
sniffing the mic.
You were absolutely sniffing the microphone. Anyway.
Grant's greats. Okay, so let's dive into officiating.
Grant's Gripes.
Grant's Gripes. So we go from Grant's Greats to Grant's Gripes. Officiating, so I'm going to sort of hot take. For the most part, it wasn't as bad as it felt, but the one mistake was worse than it otherwise would have seemed. So the one mistake is obviously the kick return. Mm-hmm. And that the kick return that was, so to everyone's would have seen it by now. And Reina Garcia, it kind of had the shot that everyone's sort of seen on the internet. She's the one that I do the Sci-Hawk game day with, so I got to compliment her on that once we actually kind of get in there. But that shot right down the sideline,
good shot.
It showed that he was in, but you can also see the referee giving the dead ball kind of waving over his head, which is a horrible call.
Just a dingbat, dude.
But, and the thing that I want to like compare and contrast a little bit is the Cooper DeJean, the invalid fair catch signal. And the difference between those is there's an objective wrong call and a subjective wrong call, or subjective right call, either way. So by the letter of the law, the Iowa State call was called incorrectly on the field with the proper mechanics. The Iowa call was called incorrectly on the field with the correct mechanics. So how it happened.
What do you mean by that?
Meaning that it should have happened with the DeJean call. It was the right call, but it should have been voided and just killed right on the field. We spent like 20 minutes on that. It should have been dead on the field, but they shouldn't have allowed that kick to go. And then so they corrected it in review when it shouldn't have gone to review in the first place. They should have just ruled it dead right there. Versus the process of what happens when there's an inadvertent whistle, whether it's inadvertent or early whistle. So if at any point, if I'm running down the middle of the field and just at any point referee does one of those, play's done. Doesn't matter. Play's done. Whether he like has the whistle in his mouth and just like coughs and blows the whistle, play's done. At that point, it doesn't matter. Now, I actually talked, so Zach Spears, teammate of ours, is currently an official down at like doing D2 and D3 games, JUCO games down in Texas, trying to work his way up. And
could have used him on Saturday.
Yeah. And I'll ask him kind of what that is. And so like, he's normally going to play, like defend the referees as most other referees are, just because it's a hard job and knowing the mechanics of something
It's a fraternity.
makes you understand. Yeah. But one of the things that he says, like an inadvertent whistle, that guy himself feels horrible for having called that because he knows that it's wrong.
But did he inadvertently throw his hands over his head?
Well, it's not inadvertent. It's just it was an incorrect whistle. Like it wasn't even inadvertent. It was an incorrect whistle when it was objectively in the wrong spot. So he's probably going to get sanctioned by whatever the refereeing governing body, whether he gets demoted or just doesn't get another assignment. He also is hurting the rest of the crew because that crew getting promoted to different games and doing different bowl games and getting their grades, that's a substantial negative grade because it's an objectively wrong call at a wrong time. Like the whole refereeing crew felt the incorrectness of that call, but you can't change it. Like that's just one of those like too bad, so sad situations, which is horrible for everybody involved except Kansas.
Yeah, and that really sucked too. Is that the reason why Iowa State lost? No. But going from had Iowa State had the ball inside the 5. I don't know if it was out of the 3, the 1. He almost took it back.
It was on the what about on the 2?
Yeah. So had Iowa State gotten the ball to start the 2, I'm going to say there's a 99% chance to get at least 3 points. Instead, Iowa State starts 31, get a penalty, end up punting from the 38.
Get a penalty and get sacked.
Yes. So they end up punting from the 38, which not trying to go off on a tangent here, but I'm not sure why we didn't attempt a field goal from the 38. It's only a 55-yarder. Or if Perkins, we were going to decide to punt, which is what Iowa State decided to do. Why not take a delay of game to back it up a little bit?
Yeah, that one I thought was, I think they were frazzled. Legitimately, I think the coaching staff was frazzled.
Sure, yeah.
Because of
they're probably still like
all the things that happened.
That?
And so the other thing that I want to like compare and contrast this with is it is the same in that with the DeJean thing. It is the same. Iowa State was on the 31. If they do a quarterback sneak 3 times, the 31-yard line is a 49-yard field goal, right where it's at. Chase Contreras, to this point through the season, you can count probably, he's missed 3 field goals?
He's first team All Big 12, yeah.
So he's probably going to be
first team All Big 12.
First team All Big 12. I don't want to say automatic, but you can count on 3 points. But they went penalty, sack. And so same thing. Cooper DeJean returns the thing for a touchdown. It gets called back. Fans are all mightily pissed off for a reason or good reason, bad reason, doesn't matter. All the offense needs to do then is execute a little bit and you score.
Did Brian Ferentz sneak into the press box?
But the other one that I want to say, so Iowa State got the ball from their own 40 on in twice. So that means 60 yards to go. They got the ball from their own 40 on in twice. Do you know what the result of those drives were?
I don't want to know. I guess not good.
Pick 6. Got the ball in 31, punted. Those 2 things you can control. Those one of the things that bothers me is you can have 2 things be true at the same time where that was a shitty call. Like objectively, it was the wrong call. The referees knew it. Iowa State knew it. The referee governing body knows it. Kansas knows it. Like, everybody knows that was the wrong call. But to say that if they got it on the 2, Iowa State wins that game, or if they get there, if this, so what? They threw a pick 6 when they had the ball on the 40-yard line going in. On the first play, you have great field position. You get a 3 and out. It's a great field position to throw a pick 6. Then get the ball on the 31 and you go penalty sack. Like, that is 100% misexecution. Now, why did they execute that wrong? What I would scratch this up to is 2 things. And this is what I feel like the general theme of the Kansas game is that Iowa State is a young team who is progressing non-linearly, which all progress is non-linear. You take 4 steps forward, you take 1 or 2 steps back, you take 5 steps forward, you take 1 or 2 steps back. Last week against Baylor, they learned how to win ugly. Like, it was a gross game. It was rainy. We talked about they played a B- game and they still won by 12.
Almost did it again this week, but then
almost did it again this week.
Jason
but
had to do it.
They came out flat and misexecuting. I don't know if they thought they were just going to be better than Kansas, or they just didn't have the scheme right. They didn't execute very well in the first half, and then by the time the second half rolled around, you're in a 14, 17-point hole, and you have to dig yourself out of it. And so this team is learning lessons on the way as they go, because they are so young. So you can be disappointed that they lost, but it's a young team progressing non-linearly. So that's the first takeaway. The second takeaway, Lance Leipold can coach, man.
And that's what I was just going to say, is that Kansas did a really great job. I had talked about, on our last podcast, that Iowa State needs to get a good lead, get the crowd behind them.
And that game could have played if Iowa State scores in their first drive and they get a 3 and out, and let's say they even score a field goal, with as much energy as that stadium had coming in and would have had, that's a very different game.
And Kansas did a great job of, when Iowa State had momentum, when the momentum was swinging Iowa State's way, they did a great job of killing it. They
immediately, especially the big play in the second half.
And Iowa State, whatever it was, Rocco was a half yard short on their first drive. Kansas goes down,
which was the correct
scores.
call. It was the correct call. His knee hit the ground. Like, we can be mad about, it's the correct call.
And then Kansas goes and scores. They're up 7-0. Crowd's kind of quiet the entire time. Iowa State doesn't really get anything going, so the crowd is just out of the game for most of it. And then by the time the crowd's getting it back in, when Iowa State's getting back in the game, the crowd's behind them. The first play, they throw a bomb.
And
to the guy.
And here's the thing. So 2 things. When I say Lance Leipold is a dude of a coach,
they went after where Cooper was the entire time.
They went after, and I thought
should have been.
I was thinking, because Jeremiah Cooper's more involved in pass defense than run defense. Like, when you compare Malik Verdun and Bo Freeler as at safety versus Jeremiah Cooper's run responsibilities, Freeler and Verdun have more run responsibilities than Cooper does, generally, the positions that they play. I didn't think Jason Bean was going to be able to be as effective in the passing game as they was. So I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal. I missed on that one because...
Me too. That's what I said last week. I said that we need to force them to throw the ball, and they threw the ball. They couldn't run the ball.
Well, and they formationed, and so yeah, Lance Leipold, the 2 things about him being really good is they formationed and routed their way to the point where they're getting the matchup they want with one of their big receivers or their slot receiver, that the little white guy who just kind of scats around.
Grim. Great game.
Grim. Those guys, they're formationing those guys into the point where they're man-to-man with whoever Cooper is going to be replacing, because that's what good offenses tend to do. That is that you're going to say, all right, we want to get Josh Lenz one-on-one with their outside linebacker. Okay, well, if we go trips to this side, then they're going to put the nickel over here. But if we go 2x2, then they leave the nickel on one side. Well, then that's motion Lenz to make it, and starts in 2x2, motion him to get to 3x1. Well, now we got there. That's what a lot of the wide receiver motions are. It's not necessarily, it's partly to get a sense of where the coverage is going to be, because the whole, if you have a guy running with you, it's man. If you don't, then it's probably zone. But there's also ways of saying, if we line up in this strength over here, we put this defensive end and this linebacker on the right side. Well, and then we want to run to the left side, so we're going to run a formation this way and then trade to the other side, so then we can get to this linebacker. It's trying to, you're formationing and play calling your way into matchups, and Lance Leipold did that perfectly. Almost every single big play was to the guy who was in for Jeremiah Cooper.
And you notice, Kansas would motion a tight end or whoever across, and then if it was nickel or Thompson, I'd go with him, and they're going to throw right out. There were a lot of plays right in front of me, and I thought they're going right at that guy. And there was one that they needed in fourth down in the fourth quarter. I think Nickel was in there, and he got caught behind. They ran. It was a beautiful pick play.
Yeah, it was. It was the one basically to seal, not necessarily to seal the game. It was the first down on the last drive when they're in grind tempo. But like it was a great number 2 runs it vertical, and he is trying to slow his pace down to where whoever is over, or the number 1 receiver is running as slow as he can to get in the way of the guy who's over the number 2 receiver, and then just make him go underneath or over top of that bubble. Kind of grabs him a little bit. You're never going to get that call as an offensive pass interference. Not never. You're going to get that call 1 out of 1,000 times. But the other thing on the other side of the ball that Leipold did a really good job of is showing looks that got the protections to change in a way that gives your best pass rushers one-on-ones with Iowa State's worst offensive linemen, or where you feel like you have the best matchup. So number 8, they're big, tall, kind of, he's their Will McDonald. He's big, tall, skinny guy. I mean, relatively skinny. He's probably, I don't know, 6'5", maybe 240, which is pretty thin for a football player.
Skinny,
yeah, he's little. Yeah. Anyway, they would get formation him to the point where, so okay, let me take a step back for a second, a little behind the scenes. How offensive line protections work is there's always going to be a zone component and a man component, and there's a continuum between all man and all zone. So there's everywhere in between there. All man means there's 5 guys up or 6 guys up, and basically the tackle, whatever the call is you take tackle takes number 79 and the guard takes number 93, and like everybody goes, I got that guy. That's a very rare instance, and it's when it's an all-out blitz. And then an all-zone is when they're bringing like 6 or more, and you don't know exactly who's coming, and then you go, all right, everybody move to your left. Like, I don't know if you watched we're recording this on Monday. I don't know if you watched the Sunday night game. The Bengals, like Chris Collinsworth called it out for the Bengals because I think they called it Lester. Like Joe Burrow shouted Lester, 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 and that just meant every one of the offensive linemen goes left. And so that's an all-zone. In the middle, though, is half of the line is running a zone protection, and they're going like to their right. And then the other guys are picking up the 2 most dangerous pass rushers on the left. And then sometimes you can do that as the tackle is a man, and then the guard is zone. So there's all kinds of protections, but most of the time there's a zone component and a man component. What Kansas did a really good job of is forcing, with pressure looks, the zone coverage or the zone protection to go where they wanted, so they could get a one-on-one with the guy they wanted to get. Because there wasn't necessarily a ton of free runners. It's not like they just missed guys. It was the fact that they were getting beat because Kansas had the advantage of their best pass rusher on somebody who couldn't pick up the blitz against that person. It's usually James Neal was having a rough day again, but it was because he didn't have any help. Like they formationed him on an island, and that is all play calling and like things that Iowa State as an offensive line and as a coaching staff is going to learn. When teams do this, our guy can't do the thing that we need them to do, so we're going to have to change the rule that we normally use. So we can't go zone to this side, or we can't go man to this side. So like Leipold can coach. Like that was the big takeaway, is that they knew how to get what they wanted, and they actually got it, and still Iowa State almost won.
You know what they can't do though?
Kick the football.
Kick the football. And boy, I felt bad for Keller, their short king, 91.
Who's short in a 40-yarder.
Yeah, so he was short previous week. That's what Michael Swain said on our podcast last week. He was short in the previous game from 42. This game from 41, he was short. Man, I felt bad for he came over to the bench. I was at the game. I was behind their bench. He came back to the bench. No one said anything to him. I shouldn't say it. A couple people said like, oh, like, you know, get him next time, whatever. And then he didn't play the rest of the game. He sat there.
He got fired.
He sat there on the bench by himself the rest of the game. And I've been there, man. You're in a funk. No one's talking to you. You're just sitting there stewing on what went wrong. I could tell you. I didn't even need to see the results. I could just see watching him, just his kick. I could tell you, that one's not good. No confidence. The dude had no confidence. You could tell he's up there aiming. And when you're aiming the ball, you are.
Well, he missed that one low by like 4 inches. Like he barely got ball.
Oh, it was bad.
He barely got ball.
Bad.
That was mostly grass.
And I was, it was bad. You know, I was standing next to Drew Davis at the game, and I told Drew, I said,
Big Drew, 6'10".
Yeah, I was like, Drew, I'm not trying to sound cocky right now, but I could probably step out there right now in my jeans and these shoes and probably hit a 41-yarder without stretching. And this guy, Division I athlete, 3rd, 4th year, whatever, he's in his youth. You're 21. Dude's flexible. You know, I'm sure he stretches. I don't. Short from 41. Felt bad for him. But, after that came, after that kick, their backup kicker, the left-footed kick, I didn't know who it was. I was like, hey, 34. And he's like, yeah, what? Which I thought was weird because like someone, like fans are talking shit to you, from the, say, oh, excuse me, what did you say? I can't hear you. I was like, 34, can you kick? And the guy was like, no, because I know who he was. No, I can't. I was like, well, 91 can't. I was like, can you kick? He's like, no. And then he goes out there, misses a 50-yard, and he comes back to the bench. And I said, you were lying, 34. You can't kick either. So
that is solid shit talk. Kicker to kicker trash talk on the bench.
Yeah, there was another guy, and we can dive into hidden yardage if you got it too.
I do got hidden yardage.
We can dive into that after this. I'll just one last kind of shit talking piece. Number 15 for them was just jabbing.
He's the nickel. Yeah,
just jabbing at the fans the entire time, just talking shit to us the entire time. And I said something to him just to shut him up. I was like, if you're out there making plays, why is your jersey so clean? And I see him and the guy next to him just laughing because he's, if you're making tackles, you're. And then was it fourth quarter when Bramer almost had a touchdown? I think he must have been the guy guarding him. He comes over and puts his seatbelt on.
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, get out of here, 15.
That was also number 2. So is that Kobe Bryant? Was number 2 Kobe Bryant?
Yeah.
Hell of a cover corner, but also would anytime there was a penalty would just do like it's on you, kind of like pointing back the other way. And then at one point he was like, it's on you guys. And then they were like, neutral zone infraction, defense. And I was like, hey, dude, that's on you guys. Point it back. It's I'm in like the 37th row, so it's not really that. Couldn't quite.
I was in the front row.
Yeah, that's good. Tufty. Last time we had like an alumni game, Tufty was in the front row. Are you talking?
Same seats.
A+.
It was the Texas game 2 years ago.
Yeah, A+ trash talk. And Tufty can project.
Yeah,
he has an outside voice.
He has a booming voice. There was a guy behind us who had a booming voice, and he was talking shit to the guy on the bicycle. Hey, number 40, the donut shop's a ways away.
It's good fun trash talk is fine.
Yeah.
When you get too personal, that's not okay. But like good fun trash talk like that,
yeah.
I appreciate that. Like always get the best fan trash talk that we got, and then we'll get to hidden yards. Was when we were in West Virginia. We ended up winning. It was the 3 overtime game, and we would do like warm up lines where like the quarterbacks would throw fades. Like you start one line is on like let's say the 40-yard line running towards the end zone on the sideline. And another group is on the goal line running out on the hash. And so you're just kind of running back at each other. And the quarterbacks are in the middle just throwing fades. And every time that I would come up, because at this point I'm playing mostly fullback. It's the end of the season. I was like a solid 255 with like a decent spare tire, like an off-roading spare tire. And every time I was up, they would cheer. And then as soon as the ball would leave the quarterback's hand to get to me, like the fans that were there, they would go, ah! And then as soon as I would catch it, they would just like lose their minds, like applauding. And so I got to the point where I started doing that. Like I would catch it and like I would flash the ball up to them and like just celebrate with them. And the West Virginia fans just started loving it. So like, yeah, I mean, the fat white guy catches a fade ball in warmups. They probably don't know that I actually do play, but I appreciate like a solid, good-hearted trash talk.
When I was, we're talking trash talk, and we dive into hidden yardage. I mean, I've heard a bunch. Kickers, though, they're out there, 30 minutes before everyone else when the stadium's pretty empty, and we're playing at Colorado. At this point, the fans are there so early they don't even have like the warm up like music going, so you can hear anything anybody's saying. These fans in Colorado, opposite corner, were yelling at me and Geyer, and they're like, "Hey, 21, where'd they find you at the homeless shelter?" And then like, you better hold on to something. It's pretty windy. Because I was like...
Yeah, like $1.40.
Yeah, I was like, well, not that light.
Like $1.10.
$1.50. But I was like, man, like that's really rude, guys. Like I've been working hard in the weight room. If you guys can say that to me, like...
I'm really trying, man. I'm really trying hard.
Run over with them. I curl 35 pounds, okay? 35-pound dumbbells.
One of them. One at a time. I could, if I put my hands on both heads of the dumbbell, I can do the 35.
That was the same game which we talk about with Jake that... I hit one 9 deep, and then they took it back for a touchdown.
Yeah, that wasn't fun.
You guys really missed out on COVID games, though.
When there's nobody there. Oh my
like
God, that would have been weird.
Me and 4 or 5 of my college buddies. So during COVID, you had to sit in your spot if you had a student ticket. Like there wasn't no GA or anything like that. But my family had season tickets. So I sat with my family and then sent them all tickets, like a screenshot, and they Photoshop all of it so the security guards would let them go down into the section where no one was supposed to be, basically. So we sat right behind the OU bench, when Rattler came to Ames,
Oh,
and my roommate made, it was just like a white sheet of notebook paper, just said Rattler stinks on it. And that was our battle cry. It was just Rattler stinks. I can show you after this, but he went viral on TikTok for it because someone got a video of it. And by the end of it, he threw a pick to end the game. So we had been saying Rattler and all this stuff, and we started the Rattler stinks chant, and we had like little kids joined in on it. Grandparents did. It was one of the coolest things I've ever
Oklahoma
part of my
fans.
life.
Oklahoma fans probably
his
definitely.
offensive line.
Coach.
Oh, come on, man.
Rattler stinks.
Rattler stinks. Grant Scripes. So, okay, hidden yardage. As a refresher for those, if I start on the 20 and you start in the 30, I need to gain 10 yards on that drive just to get to where you started. If we add up all the totals of those yardages, then that is the hidden yardage for the game. Usually this is counted as an average, but when you compare it to the stat book, it actually compares basically you take from whoever is the leading yard gainer. It's almost identical. So let's say if Iowa State won it, you take yards away from Kansas because that's how much they would have had to gain to get to where Iowa State started. So, Grant, what do you think hidden yardage wise on total for the game was? We're not negating any of the drives, even though Kansas at the very end did take a knee. We're not negating any of the drives.
Okay. So total yards, Kansas had 361. Iowa State had 333. This is what stood out to me. I guess just kind of talking about yardage. Iowa State held Kansas to 74 total yards on 35 rushing attempts, 2.1 yards per rush. That's pretty good. I'm going to say that Iowa State had the advantage by 60 yards.
Aiden?
I think Iowa State definitely had the advantage, but I don't know the number. So I'm going to go like Iowa State plus 30
104.
Oh.
for Iowa State.
Iowa State was a 104 hidden yard advantage. This was the lowest possession game of the year, including Ohio. So Kansas had Iowa State had 10 possessions. Kansas had 9 possessions. So it's an incredibly low possession game. And Iowa State's average starting field position was on their own 32. Kansas was on their own 24. So Iowa State, I think the reason why this game, it was so frustrating that Iowa State lost is because they stopped the run and special teams was obviously better. Like that sort of underlying feeling of like, why is this game the way it's going? Iowa State was obviously better. Kansas missed 2 field goals, gave up this giant return, and Perkins.
Their punter wasn't that great either.
No.
He was dropping the ball all wonky and shit. He was, and sorry to interrupt you there. When you're going to punt, it's almost like you're shaking someone's hand the way you want to hold the ball. This guy would, like in 7th grade, and you just learn how to punt. You grab the ball and just kind of toss it in there and kick it.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a mix between that and like shaking someone's hand. This guy, if you go back and watch the game, which really nerd like, you probably don't need to, but their punter would drop the ball way early, and like the tip of the ball and the ball itself. There were sometimes he was hitting it,
like 180 degrees rotation were the wrong point.
Yeah, so like the points were facing left and right when you hit it instead of forward and backwards.
Oh, so it's 90 degrees wrong.
Yeah, it was almost like the ball was at like a 10 and a 5 if you're on a clock. Not even that. It was bad.
It was weird. But yeah, Iowa State objectively
10 and 4. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's good enough. Iowa State was objectively better in special teams, and they held Kansas to very few yards rushing, but still managed to lose the game. And I think it comes down to 3 plays/drives. It's when that kick return got stalled, and it's not just that. And then Iowa State went backwards, because if they hit that field goal, it's different. Number 2 is the pick six. If that doesn't happen, then Kansas has 21 points offensively. They didn't really do a lot outside of the third play, which is it was an option/bubble go. Like the number 3 was the guy who ended up catching the touchdown pass. Number 3, meaning count from the outside in, 1, 2, 3 receivers in. The number 3 faked like he was blocking a linebacker and then took off down the field. And Freeler and Thompson, 22 is Thompson, crashed up to try and stop the option and whatever the bubble pass was going to be. And Verdun was like, shit, like this guy is running free. It's not my responsibility, but I'm going to try and get underneath it anyway. I thought he was going to get a hand on it.
Almost did. Good effort.
But it was, and then 22 didn't play for the rest of the game. Whenever you see that, that essentially tells you who was responsible for that big mistake. But it was those three things that if those three things go differently, Iowa State wins that game. Now, there's so many other things you could say that if this, you get the ball in 31, regardless of the momentum or whatever the stuff had happened, and you do nothing with it. You go backwards and you punt. You throw a pick six, and you give up a giant play on a busted coverage. Those three things are what lost Iowa State the game, despite the fact that special teams won.
And you know what? Iowa State was still in the game, and Kansas is a good team. I'm really proud of this team, the way that they have responded to adversity and just how young they are, and they are progressing every week. The offensive line has gotten better every week, and I don't know. I'm hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think early in the year, I think I called it, Jeff. Said this team, I think, is going to go 6-6, 7-5 next year. 10-win season. I'm still hanging on to that.
I don't, especially with the schedule. The schedule's, beneficial. Mm-hmm. So while we're talking about schedule, we are gonna lead into the Goldfinch Athletics interview. We have Jake Hatch from 247 Sports. He also does Hooked on Cougars podcast. Locked on Cougars. My bad. It's Locked on Cougars podcast for BYU. This is actually, I feel like one of the most. If you see the long episode title, like normally the interview with the person is like 20 minutes. We got like 36. And it was all A+ solid. So Goldfinch Athletics interview for just sponsor, just again, a little bit of shout out. If you want some Christmas presents, we're actually just about to do a fall order, get some sweatshirts, zip-ups, joggers, really high-quality stuff.
Flannels?
Not quite yet, but maybe.
All right.
Fitness.tier.com. Sign up and create an account using Gold1, and you get 20% off of everything that Tier makes. Everything. And we get a little bit of juice from that as well. You also kind of get whether it's branded or custom branded or Tier branded stuff. So without any further ado, Goldfinch Athletics interview with Jake Hatch of 247 Sports.
And now we welcome in Jake Hatch with 247. He writes for 247, also does a podcast for BYU Cougars called Locked on Cougars. Jake, thanks for taking some time and speaking with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Yourself?
Doing good. Yeah. I mean, I apologize if I start coughing. It's not a disease. But if you hear just like random wheezing, I apologize for that.
That's not Jeff's disease. Yeah, Jeff's disease that makes him cough. It's not that one.
Yeah,
it's football season. Come on, we're all dealing with something at this point.
That's right. It's flannel season, baby. Got my flannel on.
70 out here. Wow. What's the weather right now in Provo?
Well, as of the day we're recording this, it's upper 60s, but by the time this probably comes out, 40s. So it's going to change real quick on us this week.
That's A+ football weather, though. I mean, are we talking like wet 40? Are we talking like snow? Or are we talking like dry desert air 40?
This weekend, when Iowa State gets here, there's a chance for some rain in the forecast. And with how cold it might be, there's a chance it could change to snow. Most of the week, though, it's supposed to be that dry desert air. Yes.
That'd be sweet. First game at BYU, snow
40, game. Just 41 and just little snow powder on there.
Welcome to BYU.
Some mountains. Anyway.
Well, let's dive into it, Jake. So this is obviously BYU's first year in the Big 12. Kind of a rough go of it right now. What's the morale like in Provo for the Cougars?
Had you asked me that question a month ago, would have been doing pretty well because BYU was 4-1 at that point. But obviously, the month of October and the early returns here in November have not been pretty. BYU sits at 5-4, coming off two very lopsided losses at Texas and at West Virginia. So there is a little bit of panic setting in for BYU fans out there because they're concerned that BYU may go from being what was once 5-2 and look like they were, as a matter of time, before they got bowl eligible, to now questioning, okay, if they don't pick up a win maybe over Iowa State, they're going to face back-to-back ranked opponents to finish the season at home to Oklahoma and then at Oklahoma State. There's a real possibility the Cougars could go from being 5-2 to losing out and going 5-7.
That's a tough final stretch there too. So we had just had on Michael Swain last week because Iowa State just played Kansas. He had mentioned that Kansas has struggled at away games. They came in Ames and beat us. How has BYU been? Have they been?
BYU is undefeated at home, so that's the thing. It's 4-0.
That's what I was going to ask you. Okay,
and because the teams they beat at home in conference have been Cincinnati. Is it Cincinnati and Texas Tech? Have been those the two teams they've gotten at home, and they kicked the shit out of Texas Tech.
It was quite a game. Texas Tech had their third-string quarterback playing Jake Strong at that point, so BYU took advantage of that. But, yeah, you're right. They have held serve on their home turf, and that's always going to be the equation for BYU's success, is to be successful at home. The problem is their 4 losses, all of them on the road, all of them in conference. They've not been able to get over the hump on the road. So I guess it is an advantage that they're coming back home to LaVell Edwards Stadium when Iowa State comes in. But they need to get a bounce-back win because those 2 losses the last 2 weeks have them feeling like, okay, we're a little bit vulnerable here.
Yeah, I think one of the main BYU points that I think the Iowa State fans will probably get to is the whole Keaton Slovis being on his 19th school, and he hasn't played. He didn't play last week. Was he a healthy scratch or was it an injury? And if so, what's going on with Keaton Slovis right now?
So he is dealing with some injuries. Apparently, it was just an accumulation of stuff that finally caught up with him, is the way it was been described to me by people inside the program. A lot of people out there thought that he was afraid he was ducking West Virginia after he was at Pitt last year and had a little expletive that was during that backyard brawl press conference. But no, he was injured. BYU decided they wanted to give him some time off. Now they do have their backup, Jake Retzloff, who was the number 1 ranked JUCO quarterback in this past recruiting class, who they wanted to keep the red shirt on him. So they've entered that window where he could play and not burn a red shirt. So they said, you know what? Let's let Keaton rest this week. They said it's literally a day-by-day, week-by-week thing with regards to Keaton Slovis. So his status for this week is going to be up in the air. It feels like all week long. But they wanted to get a look at Jake Retzloff, and it really felt like in many ways he might have been the one redeeming factor coming out of that West Virginia game, which otherwise was it was pretty bad.
Yeah, it was 37-3. Is that what the final score was?
37. Yeah.
7, sorry.
It's okay.
I think we've talked about this before, but just as a reference, my senior year, we had the worst. I was on the team for the worst 3-game stretch in Iowa State football history. The quality history of Iowa State football, including a loss that was 73-7 at Baylor. So I've been there for some bad losses. But how does the offense differ if Slovis is in there versus if he's not? I mean, now granted, it's only 7 points. It's on the road against just a small sample size. But what changes with how they run it? Because Slovis is a very pro-style quarterback to me. Yes. Like, he's very stand there, distribute. When he's at his best, it's distribute. He can hit the, quote, every portion of the field. He can throw it down the field. Anything's quick. When he's bad, he holds on to it too long, making bad decisions. So how does that differ if he's off the field and they've got the backup in?
Well, it changes, as you mentioned, because Keaton he's a guy who's going to make plays from the pocket. He's not the most mobile quarterback out there. We all knew that when he was coming into BYU. Jake Retzloff, on the other hand, many of your listeners and you guys yourselves will remember Zach Wilson, what he was doing at BYU. Is he was a guy who liked to make plays with his arm, but he would kind of who's that? Great question. But he liked to be a little bit Houdini-like in terms of like rolling out of the pocket when pressure was there, but still keeping his eyes downfield and trying to make plays. But when needed, could use his feet to get himself out of trouble. That's more what Jake Retzloff offers to this offense. Is he has got the ability to scramble a little bit. You can do some design QB run if you need to in this offense to open some things up. And the way BYU's rushing attack has been this year, it's been downright abysmal. The stats don't say anything other but that. It's been a welcome addition to have him have that element added into the offense, because BYU, just with Keaton Slovis there, he does not offer that element, and that's absolutely crippled their offensive attack.
So I know that BYU has had some studs come out. Obviously Zach Wilson, Tyler Algier, Puka Nacua. Who do they have? Who would be the next NFL guy that maybe we should keep an eye out for on Saturday, if there is one?
The one that I would have pointed to a month ago was Ben Bywater, their star middle linebacker. But then he went and played against Kansas and ended up with a shoulder injury that has cost him the entire season. The rest of this, I should say, he is done for the year. He has been the lifeblood of that defense the last 2 years. Has had back-to-back 100 tackle seasons coming into this year. So losing him, it's a big blow because he was an NFL guy. The other guy I would point to in terms of NFL opportunity is Kingsley Suamataia, their star left tackle. He's getting a lot of NFL draft hype with regards to being a potential first-round draft pick. Very light on his feet. He's got all the size you want in a tackle, 6'6", 330 pounds, but moves extremely well for that height and weight. So he's the guy. If you're an offensive line junkie, keep an eye on him. He wears the number 78 out there. He'll be anchoring the left side of BYU's offensive line. He is far and away BYU's top NFL draft prospect.
So there's Kalani Sitake has had mostly successful seasons. I think there's really only one or two that you could say were like average. And the floor so far for BYU has been like 7-6. Right? Is that the worst record? I think it's the worst record. It's like 2000.
his
21?
second year. Yeah, his second year in 2017. Actually, they went 4-9. That was the
Okay.
bottoming out. And you mentioned the kind of the baseline outside of that has been like 7-6. You're right, but that 4-9 season, I'll just some history for your listeners. That 4-9 record was the worst since before Lavelle Edwards took over the program in the early 1970s. So that one, and they've been to a bowl game every year before that and after that in Kalani's run as head coach. So it's been a fairly steady program. Yes.
So this is the first time since 2017, you said?
Mhm.
So first time since 2017, they faced probably the stretch that they've been on. This is the first time that there's really been the boat's been rocked substantially. I would imagine he seems like a guy that, like, when you watch him interact, whether it's on players or press conferences or just on the field, like, he just seems like the nicest human being, but absolute just fire competition.
Mhm.
How has he reacted to this? Because it's not just losing. Because when you're playing against West Virginia, I think they gave up almost 300 yards rushing. Yeah, 300 plus yards rushing. And like, when you're getting manhandled, but your focus is on being the tougher, more aggressive team, how is that kind of resonating? Like, what's the reverb from that? Has it been a challenge? Has it been more emotionally kind of, hey, what are you feeling? Like, how has he responded to that? Because it's sort of right at the heart of Kalani Sitake giving up rushing yards like that.
Well, I can tell you, I just right before I joined you guys to record this podcast, he did his weekly press conference, and I'll just say he was perturbed. Is probably the best term to say, because he is a defensive coordinator. That's what he made his mark as at the University of Utah and at Oregon State before taking over as BYU's head coach. And he prides himself on having a tough physical football team. But as you mentioned, they got absolutely manhandled by the West Virginia Mountaineers. And I think that's stuck in his craw a little bit that, hey, we allowed that team to push us around. We should not be allowing that. And a lot of his answers pointed to the fact that it was embarrassing, use that term with regards to the loss to West Virginia. So he wants nothing more than for his guys to bounce back this week. And I would venture a very strong guess that has been made very clear in team meetings already.
I would imagine it's not necessarily a personnel thing. It might be, but I would imagine, did he indicate that it was more an attention to detail thing or an effort thing? Because those are the two things that most coaches will go to. You're never going to say, like, unless you're Deion Sanders, like, our guys suck. Like, you're never going to say that. But
These guys suck.
I'm going to replace them. Get out of here.
That's someone I want to play for.
Deion, thanks, buddy. But like, unless you're one of those, he's either going to say we didn't try hard enough, we didn't fight hard enough, or we just we're off in the details. Like, which one of those two things do you think he was kind of hinting towards in giving up that many rushing yards?
He used the term desire and want to at one point, so that would point to the effort side of things. And that, trust me, you watch that game, and there was desire and want to that was lacking for the BYU football program. There's no doubt about it in that West Virginia game. And the funny thing about it is they lost pretty badly to Texas the week before. But I would say BYU competed far better in terms of just the overall want to in that game, even though the scoreline was very, very similar. I think it was 36-6 and 37-7 the last 2 weeks for BYU. So it's not been pretty for the Cougars, but he pointed to that. Now, they were depleted along the defensive front. A couple of defensive linemen they were hoping to have against West Virginia were unavailable. So there is some personnel losses, but they have not had any more personnel depletion than any other season I've tracked them. And I've been doing this this is my 14th season covering BYU football. So they can't point to the personnel thing because in relative terms, they're about on par with most of their other seasons in terms of guys being missed. But it sounds like it was more of the desire, the want to, the overall effort was lacking.
Has stopping the run game, has that been, I guess, a consistent issue for BYU through the season, or is that just kind of a one-off versus West Virginia?
Texas.
The last two games, Texas and West Virginia, they struggled to contain the rushing attacks. And it's actually been something that they had kind of hung their hat on this season. They were pretty decent against running backs. And they'd held a lot of these better running backs they had faced before that to below 100 yards in terms of the individual efforts. And it was kind of crazy. The last 2 weeks, they've been exposed in that regard. And you can guarantee, because Jay Hill, who coached with Kalani at Utah, and they came up under Kyle Whittingham, and Kyle Whittingham's whole MO MO is we stop the run and we run the football. That's kind of the whole success pattern that Utah has established. And Kalani and Jay want nothing more than to be able to do that, to stop the run and obviously on offense, run the football to control the game. Well, the two chief weaknesses right now for BYU are their inability to run the football and their inability to stop opposing rushing attacks. So it's a pretty bleak picture right now for the Cougars after the last 2 weeks.
This is the you're the first guest on that we've had from one of the new 4 schools, kind of that have kind of the in relegation, the promotion relegation schedule. You guys got promoted from once the other. I think Oklahoma and Texas are getting relegated, so out of the Big 12. So with these, do you think it has something to do, because from this point, from everything prior to this year, BYU they've been independent for forever, right? And so
12 seasons before this, yes.
Yeah, so they've been independent for a long time, so they can bounce back and forth between playing the Holy War and then playing against, Washington Savannah State, like some in the middle of the season. You don't have to play.
They legitimately have done that. They went from playing Utah to playing Savannah State in 1 year, so it happens.
So you don't have to play this back to back grind, and I think that to me is where it's weird when you see the teams getting called up. I hate that term because there's talent everywhere, but like going from a mid-major school, quote, and a group of 5, whatever you want to call them, up to the Power 5 groups. It's not that any one team to me is better or worse than the other. It's that the 7th place team in the Big 12 or the 7th place team in the Big 10 or the 8th place team in the ACC or whatever is going to be about as good as the 2nd or 3rd best team in the American. Well, you then have to play that team every week. And do you feel like that has some sort of like just residual effect of like there is no break so far in the calendar? Do you feel like that has something to do with it? Is that the consistency of the schedule? Because it's not just BYU that's having trouble running the ball and stopping the run. I think UCF's the only team. I think Cincinnati to a point sometimes when they have a bad opponent, they've been able to run the ball. But it's really UCF unless Plumlee's been in, they haven't been able to run the ball. Houston hasn't been able to do jack unless they were playing Baylor, who's awful. And then Cincinnati, like I said, has been hit or miss. I think Iowa State held them to, 212 total yards or something like that. And then BYU. So, like, do you feel like that playing consistent talent every week has had a residual effect on the BYU running game and run defense?
Just a meat grinder.
I would describe it as a meat grinder, yes, because BYU, they have played in independence the last 3 to 4 years, the final 3 or 4 years of independence. They played as many as 7 Power 5 opponents during those years. So I always thought that BYU was maybe the best prepared of the 4 to come in because they had played more consistently those Power 5 opponents. But to your point, they'd play a Power 5 opponent, then maybe play a G5 opponent, and also they had an FCS game in there at some point as well. And that's the thing about it. They started the season with 2 warm-up games. They played Sam Houston, who was winless until just recently. And they also played their FCS game against Southern Utah, both of them came to Provo. BYU won those 2 games. But then it was 10 straight games of Power 5 football. They went to Arkansas and then kicked off the Big 12 slate. And it's been a grind. And yes, there has been a residual effect on BYU's ability to hold up game in and game out against this. But the one thing that BYU pointed to before the season is we know we're up against it. We have never faced this level of competition consistently on a week-to-week basis. They knew it was going to be a ramping up period. It's going to take some time for them to be able to get the adequate depth that when those injuries do hit your frontline guys, that you can have a guy step in and compete at the similar level. That is the biggest issue for BYU. I think it's going to be a multi-year effort. I'd say between 3 and 4 years, maybe a full recruiting cycle before they can really, I think, point to the fact that, hey, we have elite caliber depth, because I think they know that this is big time football. They wanted this, they signed up for it, and they are getting the benefits and the detriments from all of it.
So I want to look at both sides of the ball here, and then we are a specialist kind of.
It's the most important phase of the game.
It's
the most.
BYU's got some good special teams. We can talk about that.
Let's dive into specialists.
Okay, let's go specialists right now. I'm going to start questions. What's the altitude at Provo? And is there a has there been a statistical quantification of how much farther the ball travels in Provo versus on the road?
Well, it's 4,500 feet above sea level, so you're nearly a mile up in the air.
Okay, Boston has been less. Or it's going to spin. It's just not going to be affected. It's not going to affect as much. Okay.
It's not going to affect as much. You're right. And the other thing about it is you have had Ryan Rico, who is BYU's current punter, who has had a really, really good season. He holds the single game record for the longest punt in a BYU football game at 83 yards. So
I think I saw. Was that
Challenge
this year?
accepted.
It happened, I think, 2 years ago. I think
Because he did. I think there was one.
He's
this
had one
year,
this year with
or it was
71.
Like 70. Yeah, I remember he was standing on like his own 10, and the ball like landed inside the 15. It was wild.
Was that with a roll, or is that just
No,
that was in the air.
In the air.
That was in the
He's
air.
got-
It was
Here's the thing,
unbelievable.
Ryan Rico is the size of a defensive end. He's 6'5", 230 pounds. Like when he puts his leg into that ball, sometimes it's just like it takes your breath away because it just takes off. You're like, wow, that's like a howitzer.
It's still stats still going.
Yeah,
The
and
hang time 9.
the hang time, and
10.
he's legitimately outkicked his coverage multiple times this season. And
I mean,
that's
a 71 yarder. You can't hang that thing high enough to not outkick a 71 yarder.
That's the thing is, the altitude does allow you to get some really, really nice long kicks if you want them. Kickoff specialists and field goal guys feel like they can come here and kick longer than they ever have before for good reason because it's thinner air and obviously you can get more distance on it. So yes, the ball does travel a lot further when it comes to special teams.
6'5" in the specialist world. We say that those kind of specimens have long levers.
Oh yeah.
So
Ryan's got that, no doubt.
long levers. How about how's your kicker? You mentioned do you guys have one kicker doing field goals and one kicker doing kickoffs, or the same guy doing both?
So same guy doing both. His name's Will Farron. He was this kickoff specialist a season ago at Boise State. He's actually a Utah native, so he decided to transfer closer to home to play for BYU. The other kid they had competing with him, neither of them had taken a kick in a Division I football game before this year. Farron's been, all things considered, very, very solid, very, very consistent. 8 of 11 on his field goals this season. He did miss one last week against West Virginia, so dropping him to 8 of 11 on the season. But his kickoffs, he's pinned teams back consistently, which I know that Kelly Papinga, their special teams coordinator, he puts a big priority on being able to pin teams back. So all things considered, the kicker's done a pretty good job.
Is it Papinga? Is that related to is it Brady Papinga? Was he the NFL player? Is it like
Yep.
siblings or something?
Brady's brother. Yes. Brady
right.
and Kelly both played at BYU.
Cool.
Kelly had a short stint in the NFL himself with the New Orleans Saints, if I recall correctly. But obviously Brady had the greater success winning that Super Bowl with Green Bay. Let me just put it this way. If you know anything about Brady, he is a wild man. I think I'm putting it nicely. Kelly is a little bit toned down, but still has that same type of fire in him.
Okay.
Would you say that your kicker is he primarily put him in the end zone as kickoffs? Two-part question. That and I guess what's his longest on the year? What kind of leg does he have? Is he a big leg or is he kind of a short
He's
king?
a kickoff guy. I'm guessing it's long leg.
Yeah. So he's
the difficulty is going to become inside of 40.
Well, funny enough, he's actually had problems. His long of the season is 46 yards. He's
Damn.
actually all 3 of his kicks have come outside of 45 yards. All 3 of his misses on kicks this year have come outside of 45 yards. But he's got the ability. We've seen him boom it from 55 yards. I think there was one attempt he had at 50 plus this season, and it had the distance. He just pushed. I think it was wide right on that one. It was a 50-yarder last week against West Virginia. He didn't miss it by much, but yeah, his misses have come all outside of 45 yards. But as a kickoff specialist, he is consistently putting him in the end zone. No doubt.
And your punter, we'd already talked about him, but is he? You mentioned he's got a huge leg.
Mm-hmm.
Is he more of like a traditional, just straight on punter? Is he a rugby style guy? Is he just hitting piss missiles? Is he kind of getting good? You know, what's his game like?
I love the term piss missile, by the way. It's a great term. But no, Ryan's more your traditional punter. He's got how he came up. He grew up in Washington. He's not one of the Australian rules guys, but he does have the ability, if need be. They've done it a couple of times. Well, they'll have him like kind of collect it and take a couple steps to his left or right and kind of gauge things and then boot it. But he is very much your traditional standard NFL style punter.
Okay. And then your returners, as far as like kickoff and punt returns, are you guys? Because for a while, Iowa State last year, I think all Iowa State did was fair catch punts. But this year, we've opened it up, and Iowa State's got a special teams coordinator. So we've earlier on in the show, we talked about a kickoff return that
happened.
Things happened. Yes.
Well, BYU had a kick return go for a touchdown against West Virginia to open the second half, and actually had everybody thinking, hey, they're going to get themselves back into this game. Well, about 15 yards behind the play, there was a holding call, and nobody saw it until like after the play was over. So Keelan Marion is their primary kick returner. He's been very, very solid. He is absolutely fearless to a fault at times, actually, because he will take the ball from 6 and 7 yards deep in the end zone and bring it out. And
I love that. I'm covering kicks, man. I love that. I dare you.
His first team's corner over on the side, like, hey, stop.
Yeah,
like,
the guy who's the off returner is just giving him like the stop sign. He's like, no, I'm coming out with it. Like, dude.
Let's go. Yeah. So he's done a fairly good job this year. He's actually made a lot of hay with his kick returns. Punt return, similar to what you guys saw with Iowa State previous, it was a lot of, okay, just secure the ball, we'll take the fair catch. But this year they've had a little bit of a rotation with Hobbs Nyberg as well as Parker Kingston, both returning punts. Both of them have been given the green light. If they feel like they have an opportunity to return the kick, do it. So they've got a pretty solid return game all the way around, but I would say the kick return is the stronger of the two right now.
As a former kicker, I had a game. We were playing at Colorado, had one 9 deep. You see it 9 deep, and you think,
was that the one that he housed?
Sweet touchback. He sure did. He brought it
that
out.
was they ran a return. They ran a reverse on that one, didn't it?
I don't know what it was.
They ran a reverse on that one because I was covering
back.
on that kick. I was covering on that kick, and everything was they had. Okay, so this is complete side note. I feel like
the guy caught it like over his head too. Like it should have been like out of the back of the end zone. The guy caught it.
Full context on this one too. They had just fired their coach the day before, like that week. And then it was also, I don't remember the coach's name, but the quarterback was the coach's son at the time they fired him. And
Dan Hawkins.
Hawkins. It was, so Hawkins, they fired Hawkins literally the week before that. And we go out there, and then I referred to this as the dead cat bounce, which is like, it's not actually alive. They just had one big jump afterwards. So the opening return of the second half, they had run reverse right, or excuse me, return right, return left. And then they just snuck somebody else on there, and they ran just a straight up reverse. And this is back in the era of the 3-man wedge, and also in the era where crackback blocks weren't illegal. And so you run a reverse, and you can have a wedge, and you have crackback blocks. There are just so many ear hole shots on that play, and like you didn't scout it because I don't care. Where coach is gone anyway. So yes, Grant, you kicked it to like almost out of the entire stadium, and they still returned it because they called a reverse for no good reason.
Yeah, and like that was the one where it's like 9 deep, like, okay, cool, feeling good about a touchback. They're bringing out house it, and like, you got to be shitting me. So if there's one of these versus BYU, I'm gonna be pissed.
Okay,
bad memories.
Keelan Marion may very well do that to you. He like I said, he's absolutely fearless. And there are times I've seen the up back or the off returner like turn around and say, "You really taking this? Okay, we're going. All right, here we go."
You've got like the Cordero Patterson.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so to switch gears like slightly, you guys out in Western land, basically where the new group of the Big 12 teams are coming in. What has been the feeling from that sort of era, or that corner of the sports world, about the Pac-12 dissolution and also absorbing teams? Because to me, from someone from Iowa, we still have rivals. We have Kansas, we have Kansas State, we have Oklahoma State, Cincinnati coming in as sort of a regional rival. Like, there's a lot of stuff that we can still have. We have, Oklahoma State still there. Like,
West
we've
Virginia's
got
our couch rival.
Yeah, like we have
rivals.
There's established rivalries, but you guys coming to the Big 12 sort of left you sort of in no man's land. But then once Utah, Colorado, Arizona State, they all kind of glob onto the Big 12. It feels like it's the BYU is the biggest beneficiary, of this. But at the same time, it's the dissolution of the Pac-12. So, like, what is the feeling that you guys have out there? Because it's in your head, it makes sense, but like here in your soul, it feels like it's bad. Is that sort of what the feeling is out there?
Yeah, I think I'll tell you, I do sports radio out here in Salt Lake City. I can tell you, Utah fans, they are mourning the loss of the Pac-12. They have had a great run.
They seem obnoxious, by the way. Is that true?
They're a fun bunch. Let me just put it that way. They make it fun every single day, and I'm sure Iowa State fans will love getting to know them. Let's just put it that way, and it'll be awesome because it's a back and forth all day, every day with BYU and Utah fans in the state, and it's going to happen with the Big 12 teams as well. But to your point, is that BYU is a huge benefactor from having these schools join them. The closest school to BYU before all this went down was Texas Tech, and is over 1,000 miles away in Western Texas. So they were on a geographical island out here, but now having Utah, who's literally 40 miles to your north, you have the Arizona schools, which are a short
Colorado,
ride,
yeah,
and then Colorado just on the front range of the Rocky Mountains here. It's awesome to have that because it just makes for a lot more of the regional aspect for BYU in this Western wing of the Big 12. So yeah, BYU has benefited a lot, but losing the Pac-12, speaking from a personal thing, I grew up here in Utah. I grew up in the West. I've watched Pac-12 football my entire life. It sucks to see that going away because there's been a lot of fun memories of that conference, and to see it essentially be down to 2 teams now with Oregon State and Washington State, it's just absolutely crazy to me to think that it's all but dead.
Yeah, gonna battle it out for the Pac-12 championship.
The Pac-2 championship.
Yeah. The Pac-2 championship, yes.
So one thing, when the Big 12 kind of scheduling thing came out for the next few years, did they protect you guys' travel? Because I would imagine a not insignificant part of struggling on the road is the fact that you got to go 4 time zones over. Like, and you're getting, so that was a 6 or 7 p.m. kickoff against West Virginia, right? Which it's like a 3 p.m. kickoff, which is not too bad, but
it's 2 time zones. So
2 time zones.
It's 5 o'clock here in Utah, but it's 7 o'clock on the East Coast. But those 2 time zones, most people will tell you, that sports scientists tell you that 2 time zones of travel, it's actually a major detriment. 1 time zone's okay, but 2 time zones will actually
sitting on a plane for 4 hours to get to Morgantown, then you either have to fly to Charleston, West Virginia, or you got to fly to Pittsburgh and then drive in. We had to do the same thing. It's a pretty drive, but the travel, I mean, from Ames, it's 2.5 hours. Then you got to get a 90-minute bus ride from Provo. I bet that ride was 3.5 hours in the plane and an hour and a half in the, like, that's just everything is off rhythm. In the next few years, did they protect you guys' travel and more or less schedule all of the, or mostly Arizona State, Colorado, Utah? And did they protect you guys' travel, or did they just say, all right, tough shit, fly around the country?
So no, they actually did a pretty good job, I thought, all things considered. I actually had a conversation with somebody who knew more about this ahead of the time, and they said they were going to try and protect as much regionally as they could. There was still going to be some they wanted to have everybody play everybody and go home and away in the 4 years. But 2024 BYU's road games at Arizona State, at Utah, at Baylor, at UCF. So you're staying in the west, the mountain time zone twice. You go to the central time zone to play Baylor once, and then you go to UCF. Now, the UCF thing, because BYU does make 2 trips to UCF in the next 4 years. It's really the one long road trip that BYU does consistently over the next 4 years. UCF does make a return trip to Provo. Let me just say this. People in Utah love Disney, and going to Disney World is awesome. So I'm not saying that Disney didn't make a phone call, but I can tell you this much. Utah and BYU are making an inordinate amount of trips to UCF over the next 4 years, and I have an idea why.
That's great.
The hotels and restaurants, not the bars, but hotels and restaurants will be very happy that BYU's there.
Yes. There will still be some people who like to imbibe. There are some BYU fans who do. I've got a couple buddies they call themselves the boozing Cougs. So, you know.
the few, the proud, the boozing Cougs.
It's a niche community. There's no doubt.
Another thing, just curious about coming from the West, where is the recruiting ground? Because BYU is such a unique animal. Like, you look at Baylor, is it Baylor Methodist or whatever, Texas Christian, and all the, kind of those schools across the U.S. You can find Methodists and Baptists. So, and even you can probably make some exceptions. I imagine not everybody that goes to TCU is a Baptist or whatever their denomination is. But with BYU, because it's such a very specific school, where is the recruiting ground? Because I noticed there's a good amount of Polynesian influence on there, and that might be because Kalani Sitake is the head coach and can connect with those kids pretty easily. But also, I'd imagine it seems like a lot of the recruiting ground comes west of the Rockies as opposed to going east of the Rockies. Has there been conversation about how the recruiting ground changes or switches now that most of the flights or games that BYU is playing is going east versus going west? So yeah, I guess 2-part question is, where is the normal recruiting ground for BYU? And then how does that change going forward with in the new conference?
Yeah. Well, their traditional recruiting ground, you're right, has been the Western United States. They have pulled from California, the Pacific Northwest. Hawaii was a lifeblood for BYU for years. Now everybody goes to Hawaii. I get that. They even have pulled from the Polynesian Islands. If I'm not mistaken, I think of Tongans and Samoans, somewhere around 50% of all of them in the world are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Most of your listeners will know it as the Mormon or LDS Church. There's a large contingent of church members. Now, BYU, the funny thing right now is they actually have their starting quarterback, Jake Retzloff, right now. He's Jewish. He's actually a Reformed Jew.
Legit question. How does that work?
BYU does not restrict if you want to go to school there. You have to abide by their honor code. They're not going to restrict if you're being they actually have a very, very healthy contingent of Muslim students who go to BYU. Their basketball program, for example, has got 3 Muslim basketball players on their men's basketball program right now. So they are welcoming to all faiths. Now, the vast majority of BYU are members of the LDS faith. I think it's somewhere around 95-ish% of the students enrolled are members of the LDS faith. But BYU is welcoming to all. Kalani has talked about the fact he wants to have a very racially diverse and also, I guess, religiously diverse program. He's welcoming to all types. Like I said, it's cool to see a guy like Jake Retzloff, who is a practicing Jew, playing for the BYU football program. It wasn't too long ago that Jaron Hall, who's now with the Minnesota Vikings, was BYU's first African-American starting quarterback in their football history. And that's, we're going back to 2016 when that happened. So there's been some history made under Kalani Sitake of late with regards to opening up, I guess, a little more of the umbrella or the tent to allow other players to come in. But yes, it is an interesting conundrum here for BYU. They will continue to recruit, obviously, at home here along the Intermountain West, Utah, Arizona, etc. They will still go to California and to Hawaii, but they have talked strongly about going to Atlanta, going to Texas, going to Florida, and recruiting the heartland where they haven't necessarily drawn from previously. The good news is the LDS faith has got more than 6 million members here in the United States of America, and they're all over the country. You guys, when BYU goes to Ames, you'll see a massive contingent of BYU fans who will travel there for that game. And I would venture to say upwards of 50% of them drove within the general driving vicinity of Ames, Iowa. There's members of the church everywhere, and they travel to watch BYU play. So the nice part is they start playing more of these teams, going to Ames, Iowa, going to Waco, Texas, playing Dallas-Fort Worth area teams, that type of stuff. They'll continue to expand their recruiting profile because BYU is not afraid to pull from anywhere in the country as long as they feel like they've got a shot at a young man. They currently have a cornerback they're very high on in the 2024 recruiting class who's from Atlanta, Georgia. Is not a member of the LDS faith, as African-American kid who grew up, and Kelly Papinga, funny enough, from his time at Virginia, made inroads recruiting for the Who's while he was at Virginia, got in with this program and convinced this kid to come to BYU. So they are expanding their footprint. It's going to take some time to really start seeing the fruits of it, but they are doing their best to build on it.
We'll have a few more questions for you, Jake, and we'll let you go. For the fans, Iowa State fans who are traveling out to Provo, what are some things that fans could look to do as far as like?
Imagine hiking, yes.
Yes,
other
absolutely.
than hiking, because it's a beautiful. I mean, that's one of those places I absolutely want to go to Provo. Just Utah's gorgeous, and just pretty much anywhere. But so outside of hiking, because you can just go to All Trails or Google and just say, "Where's a beautiful hike?" and it's gonna be like, "Here's one 3 minutes away." But other than that,
I would say that, like, sites, destinations, events, things you could do, and maybe like your top 3.
And does Steve Young have a statue?
Steve Young does not have a statue. Actually, they only have one statue outside of the
Jim
stadium.
McMahon?
It's not Jim McMahon. It's actually a Cougar, of all things. Lavelle Edwards doesn't even have a statue at BYU. Now, I'm advocating for them to start building those because they have a strong group of guys who I think should have that. They do have their numbers retired. You'll see it on the inside of the stadium. It's up on the press box. They got all those numbers up there. But so BYU, the Lavelle Edwards Stadium is one of the most picturesque settings for a football game you're going to experience. Iowa State fans who make this trip, the stadium literally sits at the foot of the Wasatch Mountains. You could go from the stadium, drive 2 minutes, and be in the mountains. It's literally that close. So you can just enjoy the scenery around you. It's actually really, really fun to see that. I would encourage Iowa State fans coming out here, go to Sundance Ski Resort. It's owned by Robert Redford, the famous actor. It's about a 20-minute drive up Provo Canyon from where BYU is located. Got incredible restaurants. You can, at this point in the year, they haven't opened the ski resort yet, but they probably are still doing some lift rides. You can go travel up the ski slopes and check all that out. I would encourage you to do that. And then essentially, if you want to do some other stuff, go to Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City's a 40-minute drive from Provo. It's got all the food scene you'd ever want to see. You can go up to Park City. From Provo, you can be in Park City in an hour. And obviously the Sundance Film Festival is in Park City. It's a who's who of Hollywood when that is happening out here. So there's a lot to see, a lot to do. I would encourage Iowa State fans, if you want, just in terms of game day food, in terms of inside the stadium, you got to try the Cougar Tail. It's BYU's kind of main attraction. It's I've been told it's between 15 and 18 inches long of a maple bar donut. It's big. Ooh. It's rich. I can barely stomach finishing half of one myself. So share it with a friend
share
or
with like a family. Like, it's get one for like you, your wife, 2 kids. Just get one.
Just get one, give it a shot. It's absolutely awesome. And then if you're looking for food nearby in Orem, Provo area, I'd encourage you to go to Bam Bam's Barbecue. Cam Treyu, who's the proprietor of it, he was trained in Texas, working at multiple establishments down there, has brought true Texas barbecue to Utah, and it is very, very good. So there you go.
That's good. Yeah, I used to live in Austin, and I know just how good the barbecue is down there.
He was trained out in Hill Country, right there in the Austin area. So there you go.
By Salt Lake.
Yeah, Salt Lake, all those, Franklin, all of that.
Yeah, sweet.
I mean, that's as much as I can go. The only one is would you like to apologize to Melvin Edgem on behalf of Cougar Nation?
Do you want-
I was going to bring up Melvin Edgem too.
I can if you want me to. I don't know. Whatever.
I don't. Is that game remembered in BYU lore at all, or is it just us?
I think it's probably more on the Iowa State side.
Yeah.
Frankly, I know of it just because I've worked around BYU for so long and just being a nerd as I call myself, knowing what I know about college football. But I would say to the lay BYU fan, it's not going to ring a bell. So it probably sticks more on the Iowa State side of things.
That was a good memory. As soon as I think of BYU versus Iowa State basketball, I think of Melvin Edgem
just the chippiest. I think it was the chippiest game
The-
a basketball team ever played.
It was quite the game. I will say that.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate your time, Jake. I know I told you 23 minutes. We're going on 37 minutes here. So I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us. And yeah, appreciate the
welcome to the Big 12,
the
man.
recommendations for everyone going out there. And yeah, welcome to the Big 12. Hopefully it's a good game.
Absolutely. Appreciate you guys having me on. And I hope to do this again down the road as BYU makes a return trip to Ames in 2025.
For sure.
Cool.
Thank you.
Like we said going into it, that was thanks to Jake Hatch for coming on. You can tell that dude does radio. Like he talked good. He talks real good.
Yeah, he's got a radio voice. Some people got it, some people don't. I don't think I could because I talk too fast at times, and yeah,
You talk too fast.
I'm not quite sure that I am appropriate at all times either for the radio.
I feel like the words per minute between you and I, like, it's got to be the highest words per minute of any podcast on the Cyclone Fanatic Podcast Network. True fact?
Yeah.
Who would be close?
I mean, Williams and Bloom.
I mean, Chris's
But-
conversational speed. Brent, yes.
Yeah.
Chris's conversation. It's very.
Right.
I don't want to say polished, but like it's very appropriate for appropriate radio pace. Has been doing it long enough. Grant and I get going. It's a lot of words.
I've really tried to slow it down too, but some people have told me before, you talk really fast, and I say, "Oh, am I talking fast? You listening slow? Keep up."
And that's real.
And that's real.
So thank you for all the loyal listeners, everyone who's still listening. Great interview with Jake Hatch there. We'll be back next week, and as always, adopt, don't shop.